The vintage Paramount Theater's neon sign flickered against the October rain as Maya stepped inside. The musty scent of old velvet seats mixed with stale popcorn hit her instantly. Then it happened. A flash of searing light, screaming voices, the acrid smell of burning film. Smoke filling the ornate ceiling as ancient exit doors refused to budge. Jake's hand reaching for hers before everything went white. Maya gasped, gripping the lobby's marble column as the vision faded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Maya's hands trembled as she watched Jake purchase their tickets for Midnight Terrors, the latest horror film everyone had been talking about. The Paramount Theater, built in 1924, stood like a Gothic monument on Elm Street in downtown Salem, Oregon. Its Art Deco facade had weathered nearly a century of storms, but tonight something felt different, ominous. "You okay, Maya?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Sophie laughed, adjusting her vintage leather jacket. Her auburn curls caught the amber glow of the theater's crystal chandelier, but Maya could only focus on the vision that had just slammed into her consciousness. "We can't go in there," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the chatter of other moviegoers filtering through the ornate lobby. The red carpet beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the golden cherubs carved into the walls appeared to watch her with knowing eyes. Jake turned from the concession stand, arms loaded with oversized popcorn and sodas. "What's wrong, Mal? Please don't tell me you're having another one of your feelings." His tone carried the familiar mix of affection and skepticism that had become their routine whenever Maya's Premonition surfaced. The vision had been so vivid, so real. The projection booth erupting in flames, ancient wiring finally succumbing to decades of neglect. The fire spreading faster than anyone could react, trapping the Friday night crowd in Theater 3. The emergency exits, she'd seen them clearly blocked by fallen debris from the ceiling's ornate plasterwork. "The projector is going to malfunction," Maya said, her voice gaining strength. "There's going to be a fire. We have to leave, now." Sophie's excitement dimmed as she studied her friend's pale face. "Maya, come on. We've been planning this for weeks. It's the midnight premiere." The theater manager, a thin man in his 60s, wearing a burgundy vest, approached with a practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, Theater 3 is ready for seating. Right this way." His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, creating an almost ethereal effect that made Maya's skin crawl. As they moved toward the theater entrance, Maya noticed details that hadn't been there in her normal vision, but were crystal clear in her premonition. The frayed electrical cord running along the baseboard, the water stain on the ceiling that suggested old roof damage that weighed the projection. Booth's small window glowed with an intensity that seemed almost hungry. "Please," Maya grabbed Jake's arm. "I saw it happen. The fire starts in exactly 47 minutes. The emergency exits won't open because the automatic locks malfunction when the power surges." Jake set down the snacks and took her hands. They were ice cold despite the October evening's mild temperature. "Maya, I know your dreams seem real to you, but this wasn't a dream." The desperation in her voice made several other patrons turn to stare. "I saw you reaching for me through the smoke. I saw Sophie trying to climb over the seats to get to the side exit. I saw everything." The old theater creaked around them, its wooden framework settling with soft groans that seemed to whisper warnings only Maya could understand. The scent of aged wood and vintage upholstery mixed with something else, something that reminded her of heated metal and burning plastic. "If we go in there tonight," Maya said, meeting each of their eyes in turn, "we're going to die." Despite Maya's pleading, Jake and Sophie exchanged the look that had become all too familiar, the one that said they loved her but didn't quite believe her. The three friends stood in the theater lobby as other moviegoers streamed past them, excited chatter filling the ornate space. "Okay," Jake said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "Let's say you're right. What exactly did you see happening?" Maya closed her eyes, forcing herself to relive the terrifying vision. It starts during the film's climax, about 47 minutes in. There's a power surge. I could hear the electrical systems overloading. The projection booth catches fire first, then it spreads to the ceiling tiles. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. The emergency exits lock automatically when there's a power failure. It's an old security system they never updated. Sophie shifted nervously, glancing toward Theater 3 where an usher was already seating early arrivals. But Maya, even if something goes wrong, there are multiple exits. The main entrance, the side doors, the emergency exits on both sides of the screen. The main entrance gets blocked when part of the lobby ceiling collapses, Maya continued, her voice growing more urgent. The side doors are blocked by fallen seats when everyone panics and rushes toward them. And the emergency exits. She shuddered. They're electronically controlled. When the electrical system fails, they lock shut. Jake ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture Maya recognized as his way of processing stress. Around them, the theater's atmosphere seemed to thicken. The crystal chandelier above them swayed slightly, though there was no discernible air movement in the lobby. "Look," he said finally, "what if we compromise? We'll sit in the back row, right by the main entrance. If anything, and I mean anything, seems off, we leave immediately." Maya shook her head vigorously. "You don't understand. Once we're in that theater, once the doors close and the movie starts, we're trapped by fate itself. I've felt this before, with smaller things. The universe has a way of making sure events unfold exactly as they're meant to." The theater manager approached them again, his smile now tinged with professional concern. "Is everything all right? The film is about to begin." "Actually," Maya said quickly, "we've changed our minds. We'd like to get our money back." The manager's expression shifted to barely concealed annoyance. "I'm sorry, but our policy clearly states no refunds once tickets are purchased, unless there's a technical malfunction." "There will be," Maya said quietly, "in about 45 minutes. Jake placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "She's not feeling well. Food poisoning, probably. You understand." As they debated their options, Maya noticed other details from her vision coming into focus around her. A young couple was entering Theater 3, the woman wearing the same red scarf Maya had seen engulfed in smoke. An elderly man was arguing with his wife about their seats that Maya knew would become death traps. When the panic began, the temperature in the lobby seemed to drop several degrees, and Maya could swear she smelled the acrid scent of burning electrical wires, even though nothing was visibly wrong. The vintage movie posters on the walls, classics like Psycho and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, seemed to watch her with hollow, knowing eyes. "We have to warn them," Maya said suddenly, gesturing toward the other moviegoers. "All of them." "Maya, no," Sophie grabbed her arm. "You'll cause a panic over something that might not even happen." But Maya was already moving toward a family with 2 young children. "Excuse me," she said to the parents. "You might want to consider seeing a different movie tonight. There could be technical difficulties." The father looked at her strangely. "What kind of technical difficulties?" Before Maya could answer, Jake gently pulled her back. "Sorry about that. She's not feeling well." As they retreated toward a quiet corner of the lobby, Maya felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on her. Every person entering that theater was walking toward their death, and she was the only one who could see it coming. The ornate clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m. In exactly 46 minutes, her vision would become reality. "There has to be another way," she whispered, watching helplessly as the last few stragglers entered Theater 3. There has to be. Against Maya's desperate protests, they found themselves seated in the back row of Theater 3, Jake having convinced her that this was the safest compromise. The ornate theater was nearly full, about 60 people settling into red velvet seats that had been restored to their 1924 glory. Maya's hands gripped the armrests as she scanned the room, trying to match every detail with her vision. The heavy burgundy curtains drew back with a mechanical whisper, revealing the silver screen. Maya's pulse quickened as she noticed the projection booth window above and behind them, glowing with an ominous intensity that made her stomach clench. She could hear the faint hum of the old projector machinery, a sound that seemed to grow louder and more ominous by the minute. "The previews are starting," Sophie whispered excitedly, settling back into her seat with a large soda. "I've been waiting months for this movie." Maya checked the time on her phone. 12:03 amaze. According to her vision, they had exactly 41 minutes before catastrophe struck. The theater around them felt increasingly oppressive, the ornate ceiling decorations casting strange shadows in the flickering light from the screen. 20 minutes into the film, Maya felt the first confirmation of her premonition. A subtle electrical hum filled the theater, barely noticeable to most, but to her heightened senses, it sounded like a warning siren. The lights dimmed slightly, not in the usual cinematic way, but with the irregular flicker of a system under strain. "Did you see that?" Maya whispered urgently to Jake. "See what?" His eyes remained fixed on the screen where the protagonist was exploring a haunted mansion. The lights just flickered. "And that humming sound, can't you hear it?" Jake tilted his head, listening. After a moment, he nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, I think I hear something. Old building, old electrical system. It's probably nothing," but Maya knew it was everything. She could feel the building's electrical grid struggling, decades of accumulated stress finally reaching its breaking point. The vintage wiring behind the walls was heating up, insulation that hadn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration beginning to smolder. In the projection booth above them, Maya could see occasional sparks through the small window, tiny flashes of light that the projectionist seemed oblivious to. Her vision had shown her this exact moment. The operator, headphones on, completely absorbed in monitoring the film, unaware that the century-old wiring was about to turn his booth into a death trap. "We need to leave now," Maya said, starting to rise from her seat. "Maya, please." Jake caught her wrist. "Give it 10 more minutes. If anything else happens, anything at all, we'll go. I promise." The compromise felt like signing their death warrant, but Maya reluctantly settled back into her seat. Around them, the other moviegoers remained blissfully unaware of the danger building in the walls. A young couple 2 rows ahead shared popcorn and whispered jokes about the film's dialogue. An elderly woman near the front dozed peacefully, her purse clutched in her lap. Maya's heightened awareness picked up every detail. The slight warmth radiating from the wall behind them, where overloaded circuits were beginning to overheat. The increasingly irregular hum of the electrical system. The way the projection booth's light had taken on an almost pulsing quality. 32 minutes. That's all they had left. The film's tension was building toward its climax, the exact moment Maya had seen in her vision when everything would go wrong. On screen, the protagonist was trapped in the haunted mansion's basement as supernatural forces closed in. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. They were all trapped too, though most of them didn't know it yet. Another flicker. This one was stronger, causing a few people to look around with mild concern before returning their attention to the movie. Maya felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the theater's air conditioning. The building itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable moment when old infrastructure would finally surrender to time and neglect. "Jake," she whispered one more time, "I'm begging you. Something is about to go very wrong." He squeezed her hand reassuringly, but his attention remained focused on the screen. Above them, the projection booth hummed with increasing intensity, and Maya could swear she smelled the faint acrid scent of heating electrical components beginning to burn. 28 minutes until her vision became reality. At exactly 12:34, Amaya's worst fears began to manifest. The electrical humming that had been building throughout the film suddenly intensified, becoming audible even to the other moviegoers. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. glancing around the ornate theater with growing unease. "Ladies and gentlemen," came a voice over the intercom, "we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties. Please remain seated while we resolve the issue." Maya's blood ran cold. This was it, the moment from her vision when the theater staff would try to maintain order even as disaster loomed. She could see the projection booth operator now, frantically adjusting controls as sparks became more visible through the small window above. "Now do you believe me?" Maya hissed to Jake, but her words were drowned out by the sudden violent flicker of every light in the theater. The movie continued playing, but the image wavered and distorted as the aging electrical system struggled under the strain. The smell hit next, the acrid metallic scent of overheating wires and burning insulation. Maya had experienced this exact sensory detail in her vision, and now it was filling the theater like an invisible poison. A few people near the front began to notice, wrinkling their noses and looking around with concern. "We're leaving. Right now." Maya stood up abruptly, grabbing Sophie's hand. "Everyone needs to get out of here immediately." "Maya, what are you?" Sophie began, but her words were cut off by a sharp crack from above. The projection booth window suddenly blazed with orange light as something inside caught fire. The reaction was instantaneous. Someone screamed, then another person. Within seconds, 60 people were on their feet, pushing toward the exits in growing panic. Maya watched in horror as her vision began to unfold exactly as she had seen it. The main entrance. Jake shouted over the rising chaos. "We can get out through the lobby," but Maya knew what was coming next. The fire in the projection booth was spreading faster than anyone anticipated, feeding on decades of accumulated dust and aged materials. The sprinkler system, installed in the 1980s and never properly maintained, sputtered to life with rusty water that seemed to make the electrical fires worse rather than better. As they pushed through the crowd toward the main entrance, Maya heard the ominous creaking from above that she remembered from her vision. The ornate ceiling, weakened by years of water damage from that stain she'd noticed earlier, was beginning to sag under the weight of the antiquated fire suppression system. "Move faster!" Maya screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. People were pushing, shoving, crying. The elegant theater had become a nightmare of smoke and panic. They were only 20 feet from the main entrance when it happened. With a sound like thunder, a section of the lobby ceiling collapsed, sending chunks of plaster and twisted metal crashing down to block the primary exit. The crystal chandelier Maya had admired earlier now hung at a twisted angle, its lights flickering like dying stars. "The side exits," Sophie cried, pointing toward the doors along the theater's walls. Maya watched helplessly as the crowd surged toward these secondary exits, just as her vision had predicted. The vintage seats, not designed for the kind of violent movement now occurring, began to break free from their moorings. Heavy metal seat frames toppled over, creating barriers that trapped people against the walls. The emergency exits, their last hope, remained sealed. Maya could see people pushing desperately against them, but the electronic locking system had engaged automatically when the power surge hit, just as she had foreseen. The exits that should have been their salvation had become symbols of their doom. Smoke was filling the theater now, thick and choking. The temperature was rising rapidly as the fire spread from the projection booth into the theater's wooden framework. Maya felt the heat on her face, exactly as she had experienced in her vision. "The emergency exits won't open." Someone screamed from near the screen. "We're trapped." Maya grabbed Jake and Sophie, pulling them toward a corner where the smoke seemed slightly less dense. "There's got to be another way," she gasped, her eyes streaming from the acrid air. "My vision showed this happening, but it didn't show how it ends." Above them, the fire raged with increasing intensity, and Maya realized with growing horror that perhaps her vision had shown her exactly how it would end. It just hadn't shown her a way to change it. In the growing chaos, Maya's mind raced as she tried to remember every detail of her vision, searching for something, anything, she might have missed that could save them. The theater was filling with smoke, the temperature rising by the minute as the century-old building became a death trap. The stage. Maya suddenly shouted over the screaming and crackling flames. There might be a way out through the stage area. She had remembered something from her childhood, a tour of the old Paramount when she was 10 years old. The guide had mentioned that theaters from the 1920s often had underground passages connecting to adjacent buildings, remnants from Prohibition when theaters needed discreet ways to transport alcohol. Fighting through the panicking crowd, Maya led Jake and Sophie toward the front of the theater. The movie screen had caught fire, curling and melting like a giant piece of plastic wrap. Behind it, she could see the stage area that hadn't been used for live performances in decades. Maya, where are we going? Jake coughed, his voice strained from the smoke. There used to be tunnels under these old theaters, she called back. If we can get to the basement level, maybe we can find another way out. As they climbed over fallen debris and pushed past other desperate moviegoers, Maya noticed something that made her heart sink. The path she was taking, the decisions she was making, they were all leading exactly where her vision had shown. Even in trying to escape fate, she was fulfilling it. They reached the stage area just as a section of the theater's ornate ceiling came crashing down, sending up clouds of dust and debris. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Maya could hear the fire spreading through the building's wooden frame like a living, hungry thing. Here, Sophie pointed to a door marked, "Authorized personnel only," behind the ruined screen. This has to lead somewhere. The door was locked, but Jake threw his shoulder against it repeatedly until the old wood splintered around the hinges. Beyond lay a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air here was cooler, but filled with the musty scent of decades of neglect. As they descended, Maya's phone flashlight revealed a basement area filled with old theater equipment, props, costumes, and scenery from productions long forgotten. But more importantly, she could see several doorways leading in different directions. "This way," Maya said, choosing the passage that seemed to lead toward the street. But as they moved deeper into the underground maze, she began to realize a horrible truth. Every choice she made, every turn she took, was bringing them closer to the final scene from her vision. They emerged from the basement into what appeared to be the sub-basement of the building. Next door, an old restaurant that had been closed for renovations. Through a grimy window, Maya could see fire trucks arriving outside the theater, their red lights casting eerie shadows through the smoke. "We made it," Jake breathed, pulling Maya close. "We actually made it out," but Maya felt no relief. Looking back toward the theater, she could see something that made her blood freeze. Through the smoke and chaos, a beam of light was cutting through the darkness, not from the fire trucks or emergency vehicles, but from the theater itself. The projection booth, despite being consumed by flames, was still somehow casting light. "The light," Maya whispered. "It's following us." Sophie and Jake looked where she was pointing, but they seemed to see only the chaotic scene of firefighters battling the blaze. Maya alone could see the impossible, a beam of light that defied physics and reason, reaching out from the burning theater like a searchlight seeking its target. "Maya, we need to keep moving," Jake said urgently. "The whole block might catch fire." As they moved through the abandoned restaurant toward the street exit, Maya felt the weight of inevitability settling over her like a shroud. She had seen this moment in her vision standing in this exact spot, feeling the impossible pull of that supernatural light. The projection beam, somehow still operating despite the inferno, began to track their movement. As it touched Maya, she felt a strange warmth, different from the heat of the fire. This was the warmth of completion, of a story reaching its predetermined end. "The session," she whispered, finally understanding the deepest meaning of her vision. "It never ends." Outside, They could hear the sounds of emergency responders, of survivors being treated, of a tragedy being contained. But for Maya, standing in the path of that impossible light, time seemed to stop. The beam held her transfixed, and she realized that some destinies cannot be escaped. They can only be delayed. Maya stood frozen as the otherworldly projection beam enveloped her, its light somehow reaching through walls and smoke to claim its intended target. Jake and Sophie, moving ahead toward the restaurant's exit, didn't notice at first that she had stopped following them. "Maya?" Jake turned back, his face illuminated by the strange, pulsing glow. "What's wrong?" "We need to get to the street." But Maya could barely hear him anymore. The light had wrapped around her like liquid silver, and she was beginning to understand the true nature of her vision. It hadn't been a warning about a simple fire. It had been a glimpse into something far more profound and terrifying. The projection beam was alive, conscious, hungry. For nearly a century, the old Paramount Theater had fed on the dreams and fears of its audiences, growing stronger with each screening, each story told in its darkened embrace. The fire tonight hadn't been an accident. It had been a transformation, a metamorphosis that would allow the theater's essence to extend beyond its physical walls. "Maya, please." Sophie's voice seemed to come from very far away. "The fire department is here. We're safe." Safe. Maya almost laughed at the word. They had never been safe, not from the moment they decided to attend that midnight screening. The theater had chosen them, chosen her specifically because of her ability to see beyond the present moment. Her premonitions hadn't been a gift to help her avoid danger. They had been a beacon, drawing the supernatural entity's attention. As the light intensified, Maya began to see other figures materializing in its glow. Moviegoers from decades past, all those who had sat in the Paramount seats during its golden age. They wore the fashions of different eras: 1940s evening gowns, 1960s mod dresses, 1980s shoulder pads, but their eyes all held the same expression of resigned acceptance. "Welcome to the eternal screening," one of them said. A woman in a 1950s cocktail dress. "The show must go on." Maya tried to move, tried to call out to Jake and Sophie, but the light held her fast. She could see them through the supernatural glow, still moving toward the exit, unaware that she was being pulled into something beyond their understanding. The restaurant around them was fading, becoming translucent, replaced by the familiar red velvet seats and ornate decorations of the Paramount Theater. But this wasn't the burning theater they had fled. This was the theater as it existed in some liminal space between reality and dream, where every story ever projected on its screen continued to play simultaneously. Maya could see fragments of countless films overlapping in impossible layers, horror movies bleeding into romantic comedies, dramas merging with science fiction adventures. "You saw this coming," another spectral moviegoer observed, a man in a 1920s tuxedo who might have attended the theater's grand opening. "You always see it coming. That's why you belong here." Maya understood now. Her premonitions, her ability to glimpse future events, it had all been preparing her for this moment. The theater collected those who could see beyond the present, adding their temporal awareness to its ever-expanding consciousness. She would become part of the projection itself, her essence woven into every beam of light that reached out to touch future audiences. Through the supernatural glow, she could still see Jake and Sophie reaching the restaurant's exit. They would make it to the street safely, would give statements to police about the tragic fire at the old Paramount Theater. They would mourn her disappearance, never fully understanding what had happened to their friend who had tried so desperately to save them all. The projection beam pulsed brighter, and Maya felt herself beginning to dissolve, her consciousness merging with the eternal audience that filled the theater's otherworldly screening room. She could feel their collective memory, their shared experience of every story ever told within these walls. As her physical form faded away, Maya's last coherent thought was of the next midnight showing, The next unsuspecting audience that would gather in whatever space the theater's influence would manifest. Someone else would have a vision, would see the disaster coming, would try desperately to escape. But the session never ends. The light from the burning Paramount cast long shadows down Elm Street as fire trucks continued their battle against the flames. By dawn, only charred remains would be left of the historic theater. But somewhere, in the space between dreams and reality, the show would go on. And Maya Chun, film student and reluctant prophet, had become the newest star in an eternal screening that no audience would ever choose to attend, but from which no one with the gift of sight could ever truly escape.